This is a talk for Translators and Interpreters Australia, who are very concerned with protecting the rights and well-being and the privileges and the pay of translators and interpreters. And it's about AI, artificial intelligence, and its possible impact on our professions. And my starting point is this. There's lots of talk around. There are lots of instant experts, and we're not very sure of how much of that talk and the predictions, especially the more catastrophic ones about the challenge to humanity, to the environment, to our professions, to our work, to communication, to the quality of language, all those things, we're not sure how much of that is true. And it seems to me that what we have to do is get down and look for some evidence. Some of you may remember the millennium bug, right? The fear at the end of the second millennium that all the computers would go wrong because nobody had fixed up the date to change the big numbers. And there are 1,000 instant experts around, and the role of an expert, ladies and gentlemen, is usually to spread fear and be negative. Why are experts negative? Well, because if they're wrong, nothing bad happens, everybody's happy, so you forget about the expert. And if they're right, then you can say, I told you so, all right? So for experts, it's a basic risk management strategy, be negative if in doubt. And that apparently is what could be happening here. So let me start my investigation as best I can, and I'll start by just pointing out what I'm dealing with or what I'm talking about here. Let's hope that comes up okay. The one you've all heard about, I presume, is ChatGPT, because you can get on that for free at the moment and play around with it. It's been with us since November 2022. GPT-4 has been released publicly, so you can play around with that too. And I've also been playing around with Google Bard, which has been released in experimental mode and is available in Australia. Okay, but GPT-3 and 4 happens to be the fastest growing user base in the world ever. For an app. So people are playing with it, people are having fun, people are exploring it, and I hope you are too, and I have been. Now, I must admit that when I first went into that little world, I thought, right, that's a big change. That is impressive. It can translate, and it can give us information about a lot of other things, and it's going to be incredibly useful. But it might be this moment of singularity when the processing capacity of artificial intelligence is greater than that of the human brain. And that's the moment of singularity. It has been reached in the game of Go and in chess, and perhaps in translation, perhaps interpreting too. We don't know. But certainly my first encounter was one of shock and surprise and awe. However, as I continued, things became a little less frightening. Now, a common sense approach out there among experts of all kinds. This one is from Sasha Lucioni, who tweets profusely on this topic. It's the iceberg approach, okay, where we recognize that there are actual benefits to the new technology, but underneath the water, there are lots of actual threats, and the complete version finds a lot more threats. Some of them truly worrying, such as the environmental consequences. We've got tons of carbon emissions there, and homogeneity and representation. These are ones that might concern the work of translators, as indeed does privacy and copyright infringement. Okay, so there are lots of things there to be scared of, certainly, and a few things up there to rejoice. Now, Lynn Balker, who knows as much about this as anybody, I think, who's worked a lot on machine translation, proficiency, literacy is the term, has adapted that to translation. So neural MT, which is what we've had with us, neural machine translation, since 2016, can be analyzed in much the same terms, okay, with a few advantages up the top and many possible disadvantages down the bottom. Hallucinations just really get a crazy result. All right. What's interesting is that since 2016, if you look for actual evidence of growth in these negative things, it's quite hard to find the evidence, and that's going to be my main point of entry. So I want to talk about these things that are said about, firstly, neural machine translation, but then AI, such as ChatGPT and Bard. What's the actual evidence for the bad things? I'll be dealing with transparency first, which is a big point, a very important one. Job destruction, changing skill sets, anchoring, which we'll come to in a minute, which languages benefit and which will be marginalized, wage dispersion in the industry, and intellectual property theft. That's a lot of things to deal with. I'm going to go quite fast. Firstly, let's be very clear what we're talking about. Now, a lack of clarity was evidenced around me, where I actually live and work in Spanish and Catalan. And we had people who work with subtitles complaining that Squid Game, which was a huge success on Netflix, was post-edited. That Netflix would give translators machine translations and ask them to correct the machine translations. And there was a lot of public outcry in various forms of the press and online, and then a particular talk there that I picked up and recorded, where the woman who is head of the Audiovisual Translators Association in Catalonia, which is where I am at the moment, talked about the massive threat of post-editing. And I went through her talk. You can see I actually took an automatic speech to text and then automatic Google Translate version and produced the subtitles, which actually work. So I produced subtitles automatically for her. And I'm going through the talk, and I don't know what she's talking about because it's all mixed up. She talks about post-editing as if it were raw machine translation, as if all the mistakes that come from raw machine translation are the mistakes in post-editing. But they're two different things. The question is it advantageous to translate from scratch without any electronic aids, which few of us actually do, or get a text, run it through machine translation and correct it? And that's the only question for me. Is it better to use that passage through machine translation and correct it, or to do it from scratch? And when I teach, we just do experiments. I don't tell students whether one is better than the other. I let them find out for themselves, and we measure it in terms of effort, time spent, and the quality of the translation at the end, which is assessed through peer reviewing. So it's important when you get into these the conversations to stress what you're talking about. We're not talking about raw machine translation, okay? Now, in the case of GPT and Bard, what they can do for translators is translate, but the quality is actually not much better or on a par with DeepL and and Google Translate, okay, for example, and there are many other systems out there. It's not a huge qualitative advance for translate when we give the prompt translate from this language to that language. And you can try that for yourself. It will help calm nerves, I think. However, The new technologies, the GPT technologies, can do a lot for us and help us with what translation memory software does. Language automation in general, if I put it together, can do all these things in addition to translate, well or badly, as machine translation would be. So it can obviously bring up your previous translations. This is translation memory technology, and you can revise it. You can use different feeds. You can have different MT feeds, machine translation feeds, and the GPT feed, which you now get in Trados Studio, to get alternative translations to choose from. Lilt gets you to type and then offers proposals, and they reduce as you type. And that's one interesting thing that I'll come to in a minute. I might also add that even cheap or free online machine translation like MateCat now has a terminology tool or link to GPT. So if you're in doubt, you can click on that and you get an explanation of what the term means in the particular context you're dealing with. And that can be tremendously useful for getting translation suggestions about what you're doing. Propagation, that is, it can automatically change a whole text when you decide to translate a term in a different way. Now into GPT, we can use it to pre-edit the text you translate from. That means if it has to be simplified, we can simplify it. If the grammar has to be corrected so that it's going to go through machine translation better, it can do that for you. If the sentences have to be shorter, it can do that for you. That is, it can prepare the text so that it will work better in machine translation. These are online tools where we can exchange notes with other translators. We can use speech to text. That is, we can speak our translations, which often produces a more natural sounding translation. It can also go from text to speech, and I always do that to revise my translation. I sit back and listen to it being read to me. There's no better way to spot the typos and the grammatical gaps that happen to be there. You can revise your translation for spelling quite obviously, and for grammar, and for readability, and so on. In fact, we're discovering more things that it can do. For example, aligning text, aligning your old translations so that you create a translation memory for reuse. Great GPT technology can do that for you as well. So I think it's important to insist that we're not talking about just machine translation. We're not talking about just its quality. We're talking about all the many different ways you can interact with it and where it can help you. The main help is not that core task, translate A to B. It's all these other things that can assist us in our task. Let's just continue the list. Revise the punctuation, specific reader and purpose. This is where GPT really comes in. You can say translate for a particular reader, terminology management, terminology extraction as well, propagation. I've repeated that. I propagated badly. You can set up your preferences, check consistency. Right. Now, all of those things concern revision. Okay. All of those particular things concern opening up the range of things that you can choose between and improving quality. Okay, so my point is that what's new here is not the key task of translating. What's new is everything that's around it. We can see this in Audiovisual Translators Europe that has, I think, a very good paper on automation in the industry. And we can see you, the linguist or translator here, using tools for all these things and being aware that all these things can help you. So they tout, make good use of the term augmented translation. This is not you being replaced, it's you being extended in all these different ways. And I agree very much with their conclusion here that the real problem with the technology is that a lot of it has not been developed in cooperation with the people actually using it, with translators and interpreters. which means that there are some serious limitations in it and that the technologies can be much better. But refusing the advances of automation on all those fronts, no, that is not the way forward. They argue, and I genuinely agree with them. I think that's a fine paper. I have, however, also been looking at another big paper, a big position statement produced by the French literary translators. You can see there, Association pour la promotion de la traduction littéraire. Okay, and we have translations online. You can find that into English and into Spanish. And their headline is transparency. They say they're not against AI, not against any of the automation, but what they want is transparency. Just make it clear who is using what. And I agree. Who could possibly be against transparency? It's just basic honesty. However, there are catches. For example, translators have forever been using dictionaries. So in my published translation, should I list and declare and thank all the dictionaries I've used? I ask people around me often about particular words and usages. Should I list all of them? Yeah, perhaps I should, okay, in the name of transparency. And would it hurt, therefore, to list the machine translation systems that you've been using and how you've been using them? No, it won't hurt at all. And in fact, I'm doing this now. I've been engaged in a collaborative translation, and I do list in the preface, explain exactly whom I've worked with and which machine translation systems I've been using and why not. Now, one of the things that intrigues me with GPT is that if you ask it to translate, it will translate and give you a text. And if you ask it to adapt to a particular readership, it will do that too. And Bard will do it very well and give you an explanation at the bottom of exactly what it's done. But if I ask that system anything about a legal matter, not a translation matter, as you can see here, I've done that. Should I file for bankruptcy in Australia? I wonder why I'm asking that. Okay. It will tell you it's crucial to consult a qualified professional. Okay. It will declare its limitation and point you to the use of a professional. That is, it's protecting itself in legal terms. And now that is transparency. I think that it should do exactly the same for translation. It can translate for you, but it should say, if you want a completely trustworthy or you want an adaptation, or you want to be sure that the translation is going to fulfill the purpose, go to a professional translator, just as you would go to a professional lawyer or accountant or tax expert. Okay? So I agree very much with that, with transparency. And a lot more could be done. Okay? Now, let's see. These cases have the right to, and that they can take, yes. If you are a translator and you believe your work has been stolen, that's right, because I asked them, have there been cases of translators who've had their work stolen because of the machine translation databases or translation memory databases? Because that's one of the big risks that's always put out there. So I just said, are there cases? And there have been cases where translators have sued companies, but none of them have concerned AI, that is automation or databases, as far as I can tell. Okay. What's interesting is that if you're a translator and you believe your work has been stolen, consult with an attorney. Okay, don't use us, use a professional. So, okay, that's transparency. I would like them to do that for translation as well. I have written to the organizations involved and made that request, and they have not got back to me. All right, second point, does automation destroy jobs? This was in Politico. Who killed the EU's translators? Automation is creeping into European Union institutions. and translators are among its first victims. All right. This is in May 2023. And we can see here the victims. We can see that the employment of translators in the European Commission, which actually has the biggest translation company, agency, bureau in the world ever, is decreasing. All right. Problem is, what's the cause of it? And if you can see here, that in 2012 to 2022, where does the money go? Okay, it goes to outsourcing. So the number of in-house translators has decreased because it's cheaper to outsource, and you can outsourcing, you can adapt to variable demands. It makes sense as well. And they've managed to reduce their staff and their budget that way. The cause is not automation, it's just outsourcing. So the actual report is just a load of rubbish. Well, automation might be in it, but we got no numbers to actually show that. We can see here, just over 1 year, the budget for translators in the last year, these are the most recent numbers I can get, actually increased by 5.4%. For those staff and 11% for contract staff. So they have increased their budget for translation despite the numbers that you just saw. And if I go back here, the cost per page, which you can get from the published numbers, has actually increased. Although if you go back 10 years before then, it was about 130. So it's got better. And it's still pretty bloody high as a cost. Okay, so if they're using automation to get rid of people, they're doing a pretty bad job of it. Okay, end of that. Get some real data before we start publishing the headlines about automation. This is a slightly more serious study about the same thing. They say evidence for Google Translate and ChatGPT. So what they did was look at the advertisements for translation jobs on something called a large online labor market. I think that must be pros, but they're not saying, okay, over the period in which Google went neural, okay, from January to May, over that period. So they assumed there was a qualitative change, and they wanted to see if that had affected the employment of translators. They did find that the demand for translations declined by 13 to 20. That's a pretty big band, but anyway. And interestingly found that the demand for transcreations, these are non-routine cognitive and interactive tasks, these are the kinds that neural machine translation was not good for, did not decline, okay? And over that period, they found no significant change in the rate of pay. And then they assume that something like that can be seen for ChatGPT, but they don't ever get convincing numbers like that. I find the study incredibly naive. If you know about the translation industry, I don't think you get immediate impact from technological advance. Okay, so Google Translate goes neural and all the others go neural in the same years, 2016, 2017. It takes a long time for that to filter through to any consequence that is substantial for the industry. Although it is quite possible that lots of people, clients, went and tried Google Translate in that period, which might account for the decline. And many of them may have come back the year after when they found that they could not rely on it. This is a similar one, but a bit more serious, okay? This looks at advertisement for jobs in translation over that period. 2000, okay, I think that's 14 to 19, all right. Okay, no, it's not, it's just 25, put the dates around the wrong way. Okay, they find, in fact, there that the advent of neural machine translation in 2016 did not lead to decreases in the demand for language professionals although it did increase the demand for transversal skills and skills in the use of automation. Okay. Also skills, which is most important here, high quality translations of text that machine translation tools cannot deliver with accuracy. So there are two increases, one of them in working with is getting the technical skills to work with them, and the other to do the jobs that that machine translation was not good at the time. Okay, so this in fact contradicts the previous studies. So is there job destruction? There's no firm evidence of that happening, I'm afraid. Part of the fact is that globalization increases, therefore the number of translations in the world increases. So even if our pie as professionals gets smaller, that more and more people do it themselves, okay, the work available is still considerable. Okay, that we're not losing work just because the amount of texts that are translated is increasing enormously. Now, let me go back to that French one, the French literary translators, who said they are speaking from experience. And I went through that long document looking for their actual experience of AI. And I only found this. This is the only piece of evidence that they present in that long document. By a researcher, Waltraud Kolb, in Vienna. And they give this example where people using machine translation all gave the same translation, and the people not using machine translation gave different translations. And they call this anchoring. And this will be the problem of using machine translation, that everybody gets anchored to what the MT suggests, and therefore you get tremendous homogeneity in the group, and your culture becomes very homogeneous. Okay, no, I do think this actually happens. So I'm not arguing against the fact, but I went to the actual text in question. Here it is. This is the beginning of a very short story by Hemingway. And we're interested in this little sentence here, Ruth sat on the bed. Now, that sentence, sat on the bed, could mean she sat down on the bed, or it could mean she was sitting on the bed. It's just ambiguous. And nothing else in the story depends on how you resolve that ambiguity. Nothing else. In fact, if it were important, Hemingway would have said sat down or was sitting, but he didn't. He said sat on the bed. It's an ambiguity. Okay. Now, for me, it's logical. If you have to make a decision and you're going to invest effort in making the decision, and somebody has given you a suggestion, and the suggestion is as good as all the other alternatives, like the MT says, Lou sat on the bed, and they say that's the one. It's logical for you to go for it because it's less effort expended, and you lose nothing. Okay, so I'm really, really not upset by the fact that people can solve a problem with the help of automation when there is no good or bad solution to the problem. All right, I'm fine with that. Absolutely fine, and lots of terminology problems are solved this way and solved very well. Let me go to another point that's raised very often with respect to machine translation and GPT. Okay, this is a recent work on using GPT-3. Okay, and the sentence is this one: I'm honored to meet you, the future leaders of Great Britain and this world. And this is Michelle Obama speaking to young people. Okay, and they tried the translation into Portuguese. I'm honored comes out male, which is wrong, and then you female future leaders female, which is wrong too, because there are men and women. So we know that machine translation screws up, well, when there are long sentences and when there are pronouns, and especially when there are gendered pronouns. All right, it can be incredibly sexist, but here is just a question of being wrong. I say translate into Catalan. Sorry, I was working into Catalan, but so it doesn't matter. And it gave me correctly. When I said Michelle Obama, I specified the context in the prompt. When you do that, honrada, it's feminine, no problem. And a group of young men and women and men, I specified in the prompt, and it says feminine and masculine future leaders. Okay, so if you do the prompt correctly, the machine will solve the problem really well. The sexism is in the society that created the databases that goes into the machines. And I suggest in this point, the lack of a specific enough prompt to help the machine solve it. But let me show you a different way of solving this. Let's see if this works.
This is the offensive translation, sexist here and sexist here. The first one is easy to fix up. Just click on there. And on Rado, we can just set this one on, and we solve that problem. We can also work on the ST, for example, the future leaders of who will lead, for example, and I've put it into a verb. Let's change it to the singular, but we could make it plural over here, and we could change this, for example, there. And I've got a non-sexist translation just working in this lovely little deep L sandpit.
Okay, I had to record that because I can't do it. I can't put it here directly. What I was doing, I hope you could follow that, is just going into DeepL and playing with the alternatives that it suggests. Okay, so the anchoring phenomenon, you recall, suggested that whatever was proposed by the machine translation would attract everybody to it. But if you can use DeepL this way, modifying the translation here and modifying the start text over here, you can work with those drop-down menus and play with the translation until it solves the problem. So I solved the problem. So instead of saying, I am honored, it is an honor. I've removed the sexist problem to meet you. Who will lead Great Britain and the world? Okay, and I've removed the sexist problem there. Now, the problem for me is that sort of interactive translating that I can do in DeepL online, and I love it, isn't put into the mainstream translation memory software yet. You can do it in Cafe Trans. Okay, you can have the DeepL interface there at the bottom, but I really want machine translation to put that capacity to have the drop-down menus and select and play with it as you're translating into the software so that we can all use it to enhance our creativity rather than be stuck to the anchoring phenomenon, which the translators pointed out. So yes, it is a problem, anchoring, I think. Sometimes it doesn't matter. The case that they gave is a trivial one, and it really doesn't matter. But the technology can help us overcome it if we get better technology, okay? So I don't think we can accuse the anchoring of devaluing rich human practices. I don't think that was in the list by Lynn Bowker, or a lack of creativity. I think that what I was doing there was a highly creative process. Let me move on. Now, we found that GPT works well for the main languages I've been working with, the Spanish, French, English, Chinese, German, great, all in combinations with English, no problem, and between themselves, no real problem. But we tried it for Armenian. GPT just gives complete rubbish, okay? And the neural machine translation is questionable at best. Sheila Casillo and the people in Dublin tried it with Irish, and they found that GPT was much worse with Irish. Interestingly, Catalan, although a small language, has a pretty good electronic set of assets and works really well. And in fact, GPT seems to work directly with English, not going through Spanish, as is certainly the case in Google Translate. So it's getting even better with GPT. The problem, though, is that these solutions are working well for the languages with big resources and not for the languages with small resources. Just as a reminder, these are the most frequent languages on the internet. That's English, that's Russian, that's Spanish, French, and there's a very long tail of very small languages with limited resources. The answer there, I think, is not that we need less automation, we need more of it. We need more electronic resources. I don't think I've really got time to go into this, but the work was done by this group of people working with Icelandic and Hossa, okay, so small languages, comparing it with French and German there. And we can see the problem that the GPT is really not doing anything for the smaller languages. What's the answer? More automation, build up the databases, and the machine translation people are very interested in that, at getting machine translation to generate by analogy databases. I'll move now very quickly to what GPT is very good at, and BART, so the large language models in general, and that is adapting a text to a particular audience. So this is the text that we fed in. With the prompt translate, we get that in Catalan, and that's a good straight translation, and there's no problem with it. If we say the prompt translate for a 12-year-old, and we actually gave this example because we previously used it in class, and one of the students realized that when Gough Whitlam went to Canberra, he was 12 years old, okay? So that if you say translate for a 12-year-old, you're inviting localization or personalization of the text for the particular reader, as was done by GPT, okay? So born in Kew, Melbourne in the summer of 1916, so they've adapted July. They say, oh, think it was a really hot day. Whitlam went to live in Canberra with his father when he was 12 years old. Brilliant, okay? His father was a lawyer, so that's much better than a deputy crown solicitor, too complicated for the reader. Whitlam studied at the school in Canberra and then at the University of Sydney, okay? So it's done brilliantly by adapting this quantinia when he was 12 years old, quantinia dotians. However, as some of you will have noticed, I hope, it has adapted the text as if it were in Europe. In Australia, particularly in Melbourne, July is a miserably cold month, ladies and gentlemen. It's not the summer. So beware. The more you ask the technology to adapt, it will make changes that it thinks are cute. It really does seem to think that it calculates are going to be attractive to the new reader. And the more changes are made, the higher the risk there will be an error, as indeed there is there. It shouldn't be summer, it should be winter. Yeah. Another one that we did, because you can redo the prompt, same prompt, and you get different answers, made a similar, another mistake. Whitlam was born in Kew, a city of Melbourne. I don't know, is Kew, I've been living there for 7 years. I think it's a suburb. It might have been a city, I don't know, back in 1916, but I certainly wouldn't use that explicitation. It was quite happy just putting Kew, Melbourne. That's all you have to say. The more you try to explicitate, the greater the risk of error and confusion. Just some more numbers that can be found around the place. Most of this work is 2023. Comparing GPT with neural machine translation in our own work at the University of Melbourne with colleagues working with Chinese and with colleagues in Spain working with Romance languages and Armenian, we have found that GPT is not much better than what we got around us here. Here, we're going Chinese into English, all right, for Google, DeepL, and Tencent. And you can find here that the highest quality is with Google in this case, with Tencent in this case. And all of these are much higher than GPT, okay? And German into Chinese, the winner is Tencent again. And Romanian into Chinese does it exist for DeepL? Apparently it does, okay. And Google wins it. Beware, when you look at these numbers, they prove pretty convincingly that the machine translation is actually better. The existing machine translation systems are better than GPT. And the new one was there for GPT-4, by the way. The research was done by people working at Tencent. So they happened to pick examples or languages where Tencent came out a winner in at least 2 of those cases, okay? So there's a lot of playing around in the examples that are being used. This is a similar thing, just showing that, as you can see at the top, for these things, the machine translation is doing better than GPT. So GPT isn't a threat, except there are some cases where it does do better, is not a big threat to translation. So in fact, as translation scholars and translators in the community, we've had time since 2016 to come to terms with this. We shouldn't be completely outraged. I'm moving to a conclusion now, okay? But I want to step back and have a call to calm. Automation has been going on, since the Industrial Revolution and before that, and you can study it over time. So computer-based automation would be affecting professions, occupations. So sociology of work just gets a list of occupations in the United States from 1950, another one from 1910. We assume that the impact of computers has had an effect. Which is the only occupation that disappeared? Is it translators? No, because translators and interpreters still have work. No. Lift operators, okay? Lift operators, elevator operators in the United States. There are still some around. I managed to find them. That's the only job, okay? Because there is a logic by which automation increases productivity, which increases demand, which increases work. So there's not necessarily job loss through automation. That's what we see over the big picture. But what we do find, or what is found in these studies, is that the more automation comes into a sector, the more there is wage dispersal, inequality. That the people who can use the technology to their advantage get richer, and the people who can't will stay where they are or get slightly worse. And that's a real question for our industry. I have been fascinated by certain numbers that come out. This is from a European Competition Index. It's now a bit dated. But over a 7-year period, we found that in the translation sector, the growth was huge for the big companies and was negative for the small companies. That is worrying, okay? I'm looking for more recent information. I find that as the companies get bigger up to here, their profitability increases. And out here, it's hard to say because there are so few companies that it depends on mergers and acquisitions. Similarly here, up to this point out here, the bigger the company, the more the profitability, although there's some doubt going on there, okay? So there is some evidence to say that in general, the bigger the company, the better the profitability. And we know from other information that the bigger the companies, the more they invest in the technologies. So the technologies I've been talking about here are, Trados is owned by the biggest communication and translation company in the world. It has an interest in exploiting the technology. Final point, intellectual property theft. This has been a problem since the early 1990s with translation memories. Who owns the translation memory, the company or the translator? As I pointed out, I have not found any court cases dealing with intellectual property theft via translation technology. There are plenty of cases where translators have sued companies and other translators for plagiarism, but not via translation technologies. So perhaps I'm wrong, go looking for it. In summary, is there a lack of transparency? Yes. And I think we need more transparency. And I think it would be a good thing to apply that across the board. Tell us which dictionaries you use. Tell us who you asked. Tell us who helped you. Why not? Let's just see that translation is a collaborative social activity. Evidence of job destruction? Not yet. I haven't seen firm numbers, and the numbers that are published are deceptive. Changing skill sets? Yes, towards augmented translation, as we saw in the audiovisual industry report, and I think I can see that just tracing where our graduate students go. AI anchoring? Yes, there is, that happens, but it may not have negative consequences. And the technology should improve to move around that, to get rid of that anchoring, to make it more of an aid to a creative process. Evidence of language marginalization, yes, the automation is helping the big languages and not helping the smaller languages enough. The answer there is more automation, more language resources for the smaller languages. Wage dispersion, yes. Yes, but indirect. I mean, it happens because people know how to work with the technology. And the wage dispersion seems to correlate more with company size than with anything I can see dealing with numbers about the technology itself. So yes, I think that is happening, but the mediating factor is company size. Intellectual property theft, well, no, not yet. Perhaps it's going on and we haven't heard about it. So there might be an iceberg. There are certainly some very good things at the top. I do enjoy working with these technologies. I enjoy working in that DeepL sandpit, and I want to see that integrated into mainstream translation memory technologies. And there are some serious threats that we don't see under the iceberg, but there's a lot of misinformation out there and a lot of panic about that hidden part of the iceberg. I think as professionals, we have to sit back and see if it really is affecting us rather than enter into panic mode. Find out about the technology, play with it, experiment with it, find out what works for you. And for me as an academic, I have to do research and find reliable research before making these huge statements about AI being a threat, not just to translators and interpreters, but to humanity. I don't know, not yet. I haven't seen the evidence for that.